Good afternoon and welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. Once again, thank you for stopping by, and in these troubled COVID-19 times, I wish you safety, security for your family and your loved ones. Let me start with macro thoughts. Citibank is comparing the moves in equities between 2008 and now. History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. That's via Priapus IQ. And I stand by that this is an enormous opportunity to resell. Obviously, timing is everything. Because, as I said, on the 24th of February, a rate cut or even 4 will produce a dead cat bounce and then a dynamic move to the downside. Policymakers, I said, cannot vaccine the market with rate cuts, and I stand by that. Bloomberg Economics recession probability model is at 100%. That's David Inglis. As I said on the 6th of April, I know we're about to enter the Great Depression and that the virus is not correlated to endogenous market dynamics, but is an exogenous uncertainty that remains unresolved. And that is the key point. It is still unresolved. Home thoughts, it certainly feels like a decade of semiotic arousal when everything, it seemed, was a sign, a harbinger of some future radical disjuncture or cataclysmic upheaval. Jaffa's muezzin had an open mic moment while warming up for evening prayers, leading to fears of imminent Armageddon. That's from N. Tarnopolsky. And as I said, the zeitgeist of a time is its defining spirit or its mood, and the zeitgeist of 2020 is simply indescribable. On a more positive note, this is how the super pink moon looked over India, I think 2 nights ago. That was from Kaveen Kaswan, and I must say I spent my evening yesterday waiting for that same moon to rise, and it was really luminescent. COVID-19, as I said in my last article, is a karmic level stealth assassin. New York Books, a tremendous review of La Peste, which is by Albert Camus, whose L'Étranger made the biggest impression on me because I studied it at O-level. His depiction in La Peste of instant ex cathedra judgments, my brethren, you have deserved it, will be grimly familiar to us all. It was as though the very soil on which our houses were built was purging itself of an excess of bile, that it was letting boils and abscesses rise to the surface, which up to then had been devouring it inside. The plague bacillus never dies or vanishes entirely. It can remain dormant for dozens of years in furniture or clothing. It waits patiently in bedrooms, cellars, trunks, handkerchiefs, and old papers. And perhaps the day will come when, for the instruction or misfortune of mankind, the plague will rouse its rats and send them to die in some well-contented city. He wrote in The Plague, a pestilence isn't a thing made to man's measure. Therefore we tell ourselves that a pestilence is a mere bogey of the mind, a bad dream that will pass away. In this respect, our townsfolk were like everybody else, wrapped up in themselves. In other words, they were humanists. They disbelieved in pestilences. A pestilence isn't a thing made to man's measure. Therefore, we tell ourselves that a pestilence is a mere bogey of the mind, a bad dream that will pass away. but it doesn't always pass away, and from one bad dream to another, it is men who pass away, and the humanists first of all, because they have taken no precautions. The number of confirmed infections of the novel coronavirus were reported to have exceeded 1.47 million globally, and the death toll crossed 87,700 according to a Reuters tally at 2 o'clock GMT. That's Rover 829. Mortality rates based on the Reuters tally, based on official disclosures: global 5.96%, Europe 9.7%, Africa 4.67%, Middle East 4%, Latin America 3.98%, Asia 3.52%, North America 3.37%, and the outlier to the downside is Oceania, 0.7%. France has the highest mortality rate among countries, with at least 1,000 cases at 13.25%, followed by Algeria, which was the where La Peste was based, 13.04%, and 12.67% for Italy. It lurks everywhere and in silence, has put down Mecca, St. Peter's Square, the Vatican, Qom, and everywhere else, I wrote. And now we learned that it has invaded the Saudi inner sanctum. The senior Saudi prince, who's governor of Riyadh, is in intensive care with the coronavirus. Doctors at the elite hospital that treats the Al Saud clan members are preparing as many as 500 beds for an expected influx of other royals and those closest to them, according to an internal high alert sent by hospital officials. More than 6 weeks after Saudi Arabia reported its first case, the coronavirus is striking terror into the heart of the kingdom's royal family. As many as 150 royals in the kingdom are now believed to have contracted the virus, including members of its lesser branches, according to a person close to the family. King Salman has secluded himself for his safety in an island palace near the city of Jeddah on the Red Sea. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, his son, and the 34-year-old de facto ruler, has retreated with many of his ministers to the remote site on the same coast where he has promised to build a futuristic city known as Neom. Like the hospitalization this week of the British Prime Minister or the deaths last month of several top Iranian officials, the affliction of the Al Saud royal clan is the latest evidence of the pandemic's egalitarianism. That's an important point, isn't it? That's why I called it karmic. In fact, it's targeting the upper echelons particularly. The virus afflicts the richest princes and the poorest migrant workers with no discrimination, at least until the moment they begin to seek testing or treatment. A pillar of the Islamic faith is the Hajj that draws 2.5 million Muslims to Mecca. The Hajj has taken place every year without interruption since 1798, when Napoleon invaded Egypt. The number of infections over the next few weeks will range from a minimum of 10,000 to a maximum of 200,000, the health minister said. And I dread to think what's happening amongst its migrant workers. The article references that as well. Those workers are unable to go home now that air travel has been cut off, and many have limited access to healthcare. And that's the petri dish for the Gulf and Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia began restricting travel and shut down pilgrimages to Mecca even before the kingdom had reported its first case on March 2. So, very dramatic developments there. Interesting report in ABC News. Intelligence report warned of coronavirus crisis as early as November. The timing of that warning is interesting, right? Because that's what I've been saying for a long time, that the first cases actually happened in October. As far back as late November, US intelligence officials were warning that a contagion was sweeping through China's Wuhan region, changing the patterns of life and business and posing a threat to the population, according to 4 sources briefed on the secret reporting. November intelligence report by the military's National Center for Medical Intelligence, NCMI. Analysts concluded it would be a cataclysmic event, one of the sources said. It was then briefed multiple times to the Defense Intelligence Agency, the Pentagon's Joint Staff, and the White House. All of that culminated with a detailed explanation of the problem that appeared in the President's daily brief of intelligence matters in early January. Medical intelligence takes into account all source information, imagery intelligence, human intelligence, signals intelligence. On January 22nd, for instance, Trump made his first comments about the virus when asked in a CNBC interview, "Are there worries about a pandemic at this point?" He responded, "No, not at all. And we have it totally under control. It's one person coming in from China, and we have it under control. It's going to be just fine." I'm confident that they're trying very hard, Trump told an interviewer from Fox in Phoenix. They're working it. They built a hospital in 7 days, and now they're building another one. I think it's going to work out fine, he said. If it were true that America's spy agencies were caught off guard, one intelligence official told ABC News, that would be a massive intel failure on the order of 9/11, but it wasn't. They had the intelligence. It's not surprising to me that the intelligence community detected the outbreak. What is surprising and disappointing is that the White House ignored the clear warning signs, failed to follow established pandemic response protocols, and was slow to put in place a government-wide effort to respond to this crisis. So, the first point is that Trump is very much to blame, as are his key people. Dr. Tedros has hit back at Trump. If you don't want many more body bags, then you refrain from politicizing it. Trump, of course, wrote on Twitter, the WHO really blew it for some reason, funded largely by the US, yet very China-centric. We will be giving that a good look. When they accepted the Chinese government's line, which Trump did as well, there was no human-to-human transmission. There were people in Wuhan who were paying a terrible price for speaking truth to power. If you don't want many more body bags, then you refrain from politicizing it, Tedros argued. It's like playing with fire. Citing the death toll and number of infections, Tedros implored, for God's sake, is that not enough? So, Trump is definitely to blame. As Jenna Friedman said, a reality TV star botched the response to a global pandemic, and now we're all imprisoned in our homes and forced to watch him daily. Balagis, the virus may be the most dangerous adversary America has ever faced. It's like the US was invaded. The normal defenses fail. It can't be bombed. Bank accounts can't be frozen. Unbreakable morale. No supply chain. Lives off the land. Infinite reinforcements. Fully decentralized. I wrote, a non-linear and exponential virus represents the greatest risk to a control machine, in point of fact. And to watch the daily briefing is to understand that the control machine has a novice, a hubristic ignoramus in charge of the console. Yesterday, we saw the largest daily jump in deaths, with 7,380 related to COVID-19, of which admittedly 820 came from French nursing homes. France is catching up with the numbers from nursing homes, so it does not necessarily mean that all those deaths happened in a single day, but nevertheless, each man's death diminishes me, for I am involved in mankind. Therefore send not to know, for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. 1,970 deaths in the US, by far the largest number reported in a single day by any country. The virus is not correlated to endogenous market dynamics, but is an exogenous uncertainty that remains unresolved. Whack-a-mole, the long-run virus, writes the grumpy economist. The virus will be with us for a long time. Even if the massive national shutdown stops the spread of the virus in the US by summer, there will remain hotspots. Then someone travels, reinfects a city, and here we go again. The virus is spreading around the world. Even if the US stops the virus throughout the US over the summer, it will spread in, say, Argentina. Someone with it will get on a plane back to the US in the fall. A plane load of people with the virus will disembark, and here we go again. Viruses come in waves. The plague came in waves. Cholera came in waves. Smallpox and polio came in waves. If you beat it in one place, it hides somewhere and then sneaks in and starts again. For herd immunity to work, the fraction who are immune has to be large. For example, if the coronavirus reproduction rate is 3 and it looks like it's over 5, in a new population, more than 2/3 of the people must be immune to cut that reproduction rate below 1, where the virus peters out. It's already mutating. Good vaccines are an invitation to a virus to mutate faster around the vaccine. Smart for a virus. If people get sick right away, you can isolate without needing tests. It's nicely evolved to exploit our globalized world. The short version of these thoughts, many economic changes we are seeing now will be permanent: social distancing, a move from restaurants to home, a dramatic reduction in travel, a move away from anything that brings lots of people together may last a very long time. A big shift in demand is underway from the carefree economy to the permanently socially distanced economy. The overall cost of doing things will rise, however. This is a negative permanent technology shock. Then the next, much more lethal virus really destroys our economy and society. This is war, but let it not be World War I. Coronavirus pandemic from 1 to 750,000 cases took 19 weeks. From 750,000 to 1.5 million took 9 days. Norbert Elekes. That's what I mean when I wrote in February, viruses exhibit non-linear and exponential characteristics. It accelerates. There is something karmic in this COVID-19. New higher RO from CDC reanalysis, it's a 5.7. And as I said, it's already defeated the most expensive aircraft carriers. It lurks everywhere and in silence has closed down Mecca, St. Peter's Square, the Vatican, Com, and everywhere else that we congregate and ask for succor. It's not to be trifled with. And in my article last weekend, The Way We Live Now, I said you look around, you keep your distance, you want to leave, you think every surface is potentially a killer. You walk around the familiar and it all feels so unfamiliar. As I try and peer through into the future, the one thing I do know is that it's not reverting to what it was. We are turning the page here, and the uncertainty is because we all know collectively that's what we're about to do. The book is in front of us and the page might turn itself, but turn it will. The question is, what is on the next page? And then Politico, coronavirus will change the world permanently. Will touch become taboo? What will become of restaurants? You can't shoot a virus. The COVID-19 crisis could change us in two ways. First, it has already forced people back to accepting that expertise matters. Which speak to that point. If you're asking why the COVID-19 rate is so low in Germany and high in your country, it's because their president used to be a quantum chemist and your president used to be a reality television host. The Gladwell moment has definitively arrived, that tipping point moment in an epidemic when a virus reaches critical mass. It's the boiling point. The saliva of COVID-19 patients can harbor 500 billion virus particles per teaspoon, and a cough aerosolizes it into a diffuse mist. Gladwell spoke about this, and soaring numbers of coronavirus deaths in Ecuador City have led to a shortage of coffins, forcing locals to resort to using cardboard boxes. The cheapest coffins currently cost around $400. Look at what's happening in Ecuador. If you don't see yourself reflected in the mirror of Italy, Spain, or New York, look at yourself in that one. Real world exponential growth looks like nothing, 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 then cluster, 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 then boom. And as I said, the zeitgeist of a time is its defining spirit or its mood, and the zeitgeist of 2020 is simply indescribable. Let's turn to the markets. The euro is at 108.71, dollar index 100.127, Japanese yen 108.92, Swiss franc 0.9717. The pound is at 123.96, the Australian dollar 0.2635. That's had a good recovery. India rupee 676.3275, still at a record low. South Korean won 12.1839. The rial has rallied a bit, 5.124. Egyptian pound 15.74. South African rand has also rallied from above 19 to 18.1351. Dollar index 100.127, still well supported in these uncertain times. Euro dollar 108.71. European air passenger traffic plunged 97%. That's what I mean about we are moving from a world of hyper-connectedness to a world of quarantine. And a complete quarantine is the only way to vaccine this 21st century world of ours. Another victim of that move to quarantine, Hertz. 2-year borrowing costs were less than 6% in February and are now implied to be 32%, with prices on its notes falling from par to 60 cents on the dollar. Lisa Abramovitz. 6th of April, I said, a return to a hyper-connected 100 million barrels per day world is not going to happen for the foreseeable future. Demand hit the last time the US consumed so little gasoline was when Apollo 11 landed on the moon in 1969. Gold, you know what I think about that. I think we're going to go over $2,000 and it's going to happen in a viral manner. It's currently $1,658. I know there are lots of ABC analyses telling me it's going lower. I'm not listening to any of them because this is a fundamental moment. And if you can't spot the fundamental moment, then what are you doing? Gold, gold, gold. Crude oil is getting squeezed higher, like $29.57 on typical of these rallies you see ahead of OPEC meetings. They can't do anything. They can't possibly cut enough to match the demand destruction. Emerging markets, Turkish stocks in US dollars, there is no need to say more. M. Nicoletos. I still remain surprised that the UAE and Saudi Arabia have not visited some economic warfare on Istanbul, because it does look ripe for the plucking, as I said, on the 20th of January. Africa, COVID-19 cases, 10,789 deaths. 10,789 cases, deaths 536. That was Africa CDC yesterday evening. But as I said, we're looking in the rearview mirror. World Bank have issued their Africa Pulse, an analysis of issues shaping Africa's economic future. We project that economic growth in sub-Saharan Africa will decline from 2.4% in 2019 to a range of -2.1 to -5.1% in 2020, the first recession in the region in 25 years. Shock is hitting the region's three largest economies, Nigeria, South Africa and Angola, in a context of persistently weak growth and investment and declining commodity prices. Price of crude and industrial metals have fallen sharply by 50 and 11%. Model simulations suggest that compared with a no-COVID base case, average real GDP growth in these countries could be reduced up to 6.9 percentage points in 2020 in the baseline scenario, and up to 8 percentage points in the downside scenario. I agree with the downside scenario. Activity in tourist-dependent countries is expected to contract sharply. Increased food insecurity as currencies are weakening. Potential to create a severe food security crisis in Africa. Large size of the informal sector, 89% of the employment. This is an important point, keep that in mind. Given the fiscal constraints, priority should be put on strengthening public health, human and technical abilities to respond to the COVID-19 crisis. I was saying that to KBC yesterday. It's a medical emergency. If you don't fix the medical side, you cannot fix the economy. Resources should be directed towards protecting health workers, equipping them with all the necessary protective gear to avoid a depletion in the already scarce stock of medical personnel. Scale up testing as much as possible, implementing social protection programs to support workers. Cash transfers are the most used instrument, and all of these I was suggesting to KBC yesterday. Deteriorating fiscal positions, heightened public debt vulnerabilities. That was the article I was writing about. Time to up the dosage of Quaaludes. Temporary debt relief will be necessary. External debt service paid by the region to all creditors in 2018 amounted to $35.8 billion, of which $9.4 billion was paid to official creditors. Urgent emergency economic stimulus of $100 billion required. Debt moratorium should be granted by official creditors, and then they've done some scenario analysis of what that would mean. They're calling for a debt standstill. Look, I wrote about this in the article in the Africa Report. Debt, virus and locusts create a perfect storm for Africa. Government gross debt by currency composition across sub-Saharan Africa. Have a look at that. The share of public debt and foreign currency is larger in nearly half of the African countries, thus rendering them vulnerable to sharp exchange rate movements. I said that on the 2nd of March and before, that balance sheets are maxed out. Total contribution of tourism as a percentage of GDP. Have a look at that. 22nd of March, I was saying tourism is stopped out in 2020. In that same time, I was asking how much do we need to haircut sub-Saharan African 2020 remittances. I was saying more than 25%. These are the countries most vulnerable to a sharp decline in remittances as the level of economic activity in the source country contracts and migrant workers are furloughed or laid off. Foreign trade of sub-Saharan African countries with China as a percentage of GDP. This is the China Emerging Markets Frontier Feedback Loop phenomenon I've written about. I said the phenomenon was positive for the last 2 decades, but has now undergone a trend reversal. The Rand is the purest proxy for this phenomenon. African countries heavily dependent on China being the main taker are also at the bleeding edge of this phenomenon. This pressure point will not ease soon, but will continue to intensify. That was September 2019. A 1 percentage point decrease in China's domestic investment growth is associated with an average 0.6 percentage point decrease in Africa's exports. Hospital beds per 1,000. Nearly half of the countries in sub-Saharan Africa have less than 1 hospital bed per 1,000 people. African Development Bank Group has unveiled a $10 billion response facility to help governments and the private sector fight COVID-19. Life comes at you fast. At the beginning of the year, the AFDB was saying Africa's economic outlook continues to brighten. Its real GDP growth, estimated at 3.4% for 2019, is projected to accelerate to 3.9% in 2020. I remember responding in real time when they put out that prediction in January. Have a look at the article I wrote about time to big up the dosage of Quaaludes, predicting this crisis a little bit. Ethiopia has declared a state of emergency over COVID-19. 3rd of February, I was saying Bole and Addis Ababa is the epicenter of hyper-connectedness in Africa, and therefore the numbers we're getting out of Ethiopia make no sense, and therefore that's the reason this state of emergency has obviously been declared. Talib discussing the risks of a virus spreading owing to the increased connectivity in the modern environment. Connectivity increases fat-tailedness. I was complaining about Fly Ethiopian weeks ago, saying they were playing with millions of African lives. And as we know, in nearly every country in the world, when the virus reaches 100 people, the number of cases increases 35% daily. At that rate, a country would reach 1 million cases just 31 days after reaching 100 cases. By default, Africa is headed for herd immunity. Bill Gates warned of 10 million deaths as virus spreads to Africa. That warning is about right. Look at what's happening in Ecuador. If you don't see yourself reflected in the mirror of Italy, Spain, or New York, look at yourself in that one. The growth rate of confirmed cases is now much faster in the poorest countries. Max Rosa. We are looking in the rear-view mirror when we look at these numbers. Interesting to see the picture of COVID-19 in Greater Africa East on March 25 and 2 weeks later, yesterday, Cobo 3. As I said, real-world exponential growth, epsilon theory said it actually, it looks like nothing, 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 then cluster, 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 then boom. Desert locust outbreak at crisis point, industry body says. More than 25 million hectares of farmland are affected in Ethiopia, Kenya, and Somalia, the 3 countries hardest hit by the voracious insects, Grow Intelligence said in an emailed report. Driven by widespread rains and near-perfect breeding conditions in late March, locust swarms in East Africa have gotten larger, more destructive since they were first reported earlier this year. As I said in my Africa Reporter article, East Africa was a bright spot but is now facing down a locust invasion which, according to the FAO, could turn 500x by June. South African All Shares down 18.21% year to date, has rebounded quite sharply. Dollar Rand 18.1358, Egyptian Pound 15.75, EGX 30 down 27.69%, Nigerian All Share down 21.49%, Ghana Stock Exchange down 6.65%. Interesting BBC program, Virus, Gangsters, Food Parcels, and the Unlikely Truce Taking Hold on Some of the World's Most Dangerous Streets, our report from Cape Town. In this image in Kenya, a man in mandatory quarantine in Kenya holds a sign reading, "Help me," out of the window of a facility in Nairobi. Hundreds of people held under mandatory quarantine in Kenya after returning from abroad are up in arms after the government extended their confinement for another 14 days. 2,000 people were placed in forced quarantine as they arrived in the country from March 22nd, mixed with those who had been in contact with patients who tested positive. The quarantined Kenyans and foreigners make up some 80% of the country's coronavirus patients. They're basically concentrating the testing there. Upon his arrival at the international airport in Nairobi on March 24, he said passengers were rounded up by aggressive police officers who were not wearing protection gear. Described hundreds of people tense, sweating in a small space in an airport that had turned off its ventilation, who after hours of waiting were herded into crowded buses. There are no doctors or medical staff anywhere. There is no hand sanitizer. There are no gloves, there are no masks. It's after midnight and everyone looks broken. The passengers have been forced to pay for their own accommodation. We don't have water at times. We lack soap. We don't have masks. She told AFP that 5 people who had been tested on March 29 found out on April 2 they were positive for coronavirus were not removed from the school until 2 days later. We know that coronavirus is exponential, non-linear and multiplicative, and seeing what's happening there, you can see you're giving it momentum. We are staring, I said about Africa, into the abyss of a zombie apocalypse. A new kind of stress test. The central bank is asking banks to put forward their succession plans because, as I said, there is something karmic in this COVID-19. Fitch, global shock will stress Kenya's external balances. However, Kenya's status as an oil importer will mitigate the external stress due to the fall in oil prices. Import compression will keep the widening of the current account to between 5 and 6% of GDP in 2020. Fitch, failure to stabilize government debt to GDP levels or a widening of the current account caused by falling export receipts or remittance inflows could lead to a negative rating action. Well, that's inevitable. IMF's recommendation on unexpected savings from lower international oil prices is that governments should use that opportunity to tax oil products more. Press release from the Central Bank of Kenya, regulatory actions against ABSA Kenya. This is around foreign exchange trading. Kenya shilling 105.96, Nairobi All Share down 21.3%, NSE20 down 25.85%. Thank you for listening.